By the end of World War II in 1945, the USA and USSR had grown apart in every way except for the fact that they both wanted Hitler dead. So when Hitler died and the war was over, stuff pretty much hit the fan. America is capitalist and democratic, and capitalism and democracy sort of go together. In democracy, people are allowed to make the choices that they believe will help them the most and be the best for them as individuals, or to be happy. In terms of the government, this means that people express their opinions by voting. Capitalism and democracy, for the most part, are what America has lived under for the past 200 plus years. So capitalism is kind of like democracy for business. Capitalism is kind of like democracy for businesses. In capitalism, businesses are owned by individuals, not the government. The business owners can do what they need to earn their money, as long as they're not hurting people. In theory, the smartest and hardest working businesses make the most money. The cost of something is determined by how badly people want it. Do you want that new video game system? $300. Oh wait, a lot of people want that new system? $400. America is a liberal country, so that means we value freedom, both of religion and to live your life the way you want to live it. But capitalism and democracy aren't the only ways to run a society. During the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, people realized that workers were mistreated by the capitalist bosses. They believed people needed somebody to look out for them and provide them with the necessities of life: education, healthcare, housing, transportation, retirement, all of the things that you truly need to survive. America is capitalist and democratic, but we have some socialist ideals built into our system as well. By American standards, there are a lot of free, democratically elected countries today that are much more socialist than America, and they do not have dictators. They also still have businesses owned by regular people, so they are still capitalist. These include places like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. These countries, by the way, are generally ranked as some of the freest, happiest, healthiest, and most educated countries in the world. A little bit closer to home, Milwaukee itself has had 3 socialist mayors. Guys like Frank Zeidler, Emil Seidel, and Daniel Hohn all contributed to Milwaukee creating things like the fire and police departments, parks department, installing streetlights, modernizing the sewage and water systems, as well as Milwaukee's first bus system. So when you get on that bus today, or flush a toilet, you can thank Milwaukee's socialist mayors. And from the idea of socialism, this finely bearded fellow, Karl Marx, came up with an extreme version of socialism called communism. He explained that in capitalism there were 2 social classes: the bourgeoisie, or upper-class, wealthy land and business owners, and the poor people that worked for the bourgeoisie, called the proletariat. In Marx's world, a revolution would take place where the proletariat would overthrow the bourgeoisie and share the ownership of everything. In other words, everything would be owned by the community, and from the word community comes communism. According to Lenin and Stalin, this was the November Revolution of 1917 in Russia, which was led by a group of workers called Soviets, after which Russia became the USSR. So, like all great leaders, Lenin and Stalin took the ideas of Marxism, socialism, and communism and made them their own. So what did communism look like in socialist or communist countries during the Cold War? The government chose how much to make, how to get goods to the people, and how much to charge. In many communist countries, religion was outlawed because they believed that it created inequalities. Communist countries believed that in capitalism, people were okay with being poor, or others being rich, because God made it that way. So they got rid of God and personal ownership so that everybody would be equal. Leninism and Stalinism also had parts that other socialist and communist countries don't necessarily have to have, like people to spy on their own citizens, arresting people for speaking bad about the government, and of course prison camps. Communism and socialism don't have to have paranoia and persecution. That was pure Stalin. To understand the Cold War, We have to look back in time a little bit to the relationship between America and the Soviet Union in the first half of the 20th century. In 1918, at the end of the First World War, America tried keeping troops in Europe and sending them into Russia to destroy the communist revolution. This didn't work out. America's troops left. Russia turned into the communist Soviet Union, and it probably made a few Russians unhappy that America was trying to get all up in their grill. Then, it took until 1933 for America to officially recognize the Soviet Union as a country. This was about 15 years after the Soviet Union had considered itself a country, kind of what you might call a diss to the communist country. Then, all of a sudden, in 1941, both countries decided that they didn't like this Hitler fellow, so they became allies until the end of World War II. This is what we call uneasy bedfellows. If you don't get what that means, think about it. So here are the big differences. We select our representatives in government and can join any of the many political parties that exist, or we can make our own if we wish. The USSR only has one political party, communism. The government chooses its own leaders. The USSR was authoritarian, and the people had to do what the government said. This applied to the businesses too. In America, we're capitalist, where individual citizens own the businesses and can pretty much do what they want. Not so in the communist USSR. There, the government owned all of the businesses and told them what and how much to make of their products. Finally, both countries had differing ideas about what would keep them safe. Americans believed that in order to keep America safe, we could not let communism spread. In the USSR, the Soviet government believed that they were safer if other countries became communist. So by 1945, after the end of World War II, the USA and USSR were extremely different countries. America was riding high from the war. For the most part, businesses were booming. America was undamaged by the fighting of World War II, which meant that our factories were some of the only factories in the world that could produce goods. We were wealthy. The Soviet Union's factories were destroyed by Germany. America was also the only country in the world with the knowledge to make an atomic bomb, making us the strongest military in the world. On the other hand, you had the Soviet Union. 30 million Soviet people died in World War II, nearly half of all the total deaths of the war. In addition, American farmlands were safe and could provide the world with food, for a price of course. As far as their farmland went in the Soviet Union, much of the Soviet farms were damaged by their people in government so that the Germans could not use it for supplies. The USSR was poor, beaten, and hungry. I mean, they couldn't even afford moving animations for their half of this slide.